Today we are going to be discussing the dimensions of behavior. The first dimension of behavior that we will discuss is frequency. Frequency is the number of responses in which the behavior occurred. So think of count. Frequency is the dimension of interest when you want to know how many times something occurs. An example of taking frequency data would be the number of times a student answered a question correctly, or the number of times a student talks out of turn. The next dimension of behavior is rate. Rate refers to a ratio of count per observation time and is calculated by dividing the number of responses by the total observation time. So think frequency within a defined amount of time. So for example, if I was interested in knowing the rate of correct responses, I would count the number of correct answers on a student's math fact sheet and divide that number by the time it took that student to complete. So a count of 9 correct answers during a 10-minute work block would equal a rate of 0.90 per minute. Or another example, if I was interested in how many talkouts happened within a class period, I would count the number of talkouts during the period and divide that by the number of minutes in the class period. So a count of 12 talkouts in a 40-minute period would equal a rate of 0.3 per minute. The next dimension of behavior is duration. This is how long a behavior lasts. Duration is a good dimension of interest when measuring a behavior that a person is engaging in for too long or for too short of a period of time. For duration, you can measure the total duration of an entire observation session. So for example, the student was out of their seat for 43 minutes in a 60-minute window of time. Or duration per occurrence. The student was out of their seat for an average of 3.07 seconds per minute over 14 instances. Intensity is another dimension of behavior. This refers to the strength of the intensity of the behavior. An example of an intensity scale might be mild, which the behavior is disruptive but not dangerous. Moderate, the behavior could include verbal and physical threats and or be destructive to physical environment. And then severe would be posing a physical danger to students and or others. Some examples of what that scale might actually look like when defined for a specific student might be mild behavior would be the student refusing to do work and tapping their foot and maybe their pencils. Moderate would be the student ripping up pages in a book and throwing it across the room. And then severe might be the student striking peers with sufficient force to cause bruising, or the student grabbing peers around the neck in an attempt to choke him or her. Always remember, if you're using a numbered scale, for example 1 to 5, be sure to indicate specific definitions for each numerical value. It's important when people are taking data for everyone to be on the same page, as the same practitioner may not always be taking data on the same student every single day. Another dimension is latency. This is the amount of time it took for a behavior to occur or be initiated. Latency is a good dimension when you are interested in the length of time between when a behavior is requested, which is the stimulus, and when it actually begins, the response. For example, you might want to know how long it takes a student to begin writing after the teacher explains the writing task and asks the student to begin. This would be measuring latency. Topography is what a behavior actually looks like or does not look like. So more specifically, it's the behavior shape and form. For example, you may be interested in the letter writing skills of a student, or specifically what melting down does or does not look like. Let's talk about selecting a measurement system. One question that you want to ask yourself is, does the performance of the behavior take about the same length of time as every other time? If the answer to this is yes, then this would be more of a uniform behavior like swearing or talkouts. And for this, you may want a more event-based recording system, such as frequency recording, where you can record the number of times the behavior occurred and then possibly convert that to a rate if it's possible. This can also be used in instances of wanting to record the intensity of behaviors. In continuing and talking about selecting a measurement system, if you're measuring behaviors that vary in length of time, so for example, time on task, out-of-seat behavior, you will need to use more of an event-based or time-based recording system. Time sampling is a way of collecting information that involves observing the behavior for a particular time interval to see whether or not it occurred. There are 3 different types of time sampling. The first type of time sampling is whole interval recording. This is recording whether or not the behavior was performed for the entire period of the interval. So an example of this is if in a 15-minute period of time, you are recording whether or not a student read the entire time, you would mark a Y for yes if they read the entire 15 minutes, and an N for no if they weren't reading the whole time. Even if they only didn't read for 1 minute out of the 15 minutes, you would still mark an N. Another type of time sampling is partial interval recording. This is when the behavior is marked for occurring in that interval if the behavior occurred at all at any time point during that interval. So if we're taking that 15-minute time sampling example again with the reading, you would mark any time reading was occurring at all during that interval. The third is time sampling, a recording system where you record whether the behavior is occurring at that moment that each interval ended. So in a 15-minute observation using a 1-minute interval, I would record whether the behavior was occurring at the end of each 1-minute period during the 15 minutes. Let's look at this choosing a data collection method paper. On the left, you'll see a column that has the type of behavior, and then on the right, you will see the data collection method. This is a very useful resource that we will be loading onto ReggieNet because it might help you to decide which type of data collection method you should use based on the behavior that you are trying to measure. Let's just look at a few examples. So if the behavior does not occur that often, you may want to use frequency or rate, and you definitely would probably want to do some ABC recording. The behavior is easy to count, but the length of observation time varies day to day. Then you would want to use rate as your data collection method. If the behavior occurs for long periods of time and the beginning and the end of the behavior are observable, then you may want to use duration. Skipping down further to the bottom, if we need to know how long it takes for a student to start engaging in a behavior when presented with the opportunity, that would be latency. Here you can see Maslow's hierarchy of school needs. This is a little bit different from the hierarchy of needs that we are familiar with. This is directly correlated to school and what students need in order to be available to learn. So if we look down at the bottom with the physiological needs, so that's just their basic needs are met. Eats breakfast, has clean clothing, able to sleep, a safe place to go home. If that need is met, then we go up to safety. So they need to feel emotional and physical safety, clear school and class routines, access to counselors and a nurse. They must feel like it's okay to take risks. If that need is met, then we go up to belonging. This is forming relationships, so making sure that they have adult role models. There are friendship groups, peer relationships. If that is met, then we go up to esteem. This is making sure that a positive classroom culture is present. So positive feedback, time for reflection, and an encouragement to take risks. And if all of these needs have been met, then we move up to self-actualization, where the student is available to learn. Now, it's understandable that that bottom tier, the physiological needs, some of these things are things that we at school cannot control. However, we can help students to be more available to learn by helping meet these needs at school, by helping to give them breakfast if you know that they don't eat. We can have clean clothing available for them or wash their clothing once they get to school. We can give them periods of time where they can rest and relax and sleep so that we can then start moving up the hierarchy to really get to that self-actualization piece and have the student available to learn. This concludes our talk on dimensions of behavior. There's a video that will follow this in a separate link where you will watch a video on measuring dimensions of behavior on Edpuzzle. Thank you for listening, and I hope this has been informative.